There is something peaceful about sitting with ancient questions. Questions that have no urgency attached to them. Questions that don't demand immediate answers or actions, but simply invite you to rest in their presence for a while. Tonight we're going to explore one of those questions, perhaps the most ancient question of all. What did the philosophers of the ancient world believe about happiness? Not happiness as we often think of it today, not the bright flash of excitement or the temporary pleasure of getting what we want, but something deeper, something they spent entire lifetimes contemplating in quiet gardens, under olive trees, in marble halls, and in simple rooms lit only by oil lamps. The ancient world moved slowly. There was time to think, time to sit, time to let ideas settle into the mind like sediment drifting down through still water. The philosophers we'll explore tonight didn't write quickly or speak in sound bites. They took their time. They returned to the same ideas again and again, circling around them, looking at them from different angles, letting understanding develop gradually, the way dawn develops across the sky, not all at once but slowly, gently, until suddenly there is light. Happiness, for the ancients, was not a feeling that came and went with circumstances. It was not dependent on whether things were going well or going badly. It was something else entirely, something that could exist even in difficulty, even in loss, even in the midst of a world that was often harsh and unpredictable. They called it by different names in different schools of thought. The Greeks called it eudaimonia, which doesn't translate easily into our modern word happiness. It means something closer to flourishing, or living well, or the state of having a good spirit. It was not about feeling good in the moment. It was about being good, about living in accordance with something higher, something true. The question of happiness occupied the ancient mind, not as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be lived with, to be explored, to be understood more deeply with each passing year. And as we move through these ancient perspectives tonight, there's no need to grasp at them or memorize them, or decide which one is correct. We're simply going to let them wash over us, let them speak in their own voice, let them offer what they have to offer. There's no test at the end, no conclusion we must reach. We're just here, in the quiet, listening to voices from long ago, voices that spoke about happiness when the world was younger and time moved more slowly. Let's begin not with any particular philosopher, but with the general sense that existed in the ancient Mediterranean world, before philosophy became highly systematic, before schools were founded and doctrines were written down. In the time before Socrates, before the great philosophical schools, people understood happiness in a way that was deeply connected to fate, to the gods, to forces beyond human control. There was a sense that happiness was something granted or withheld by powers greater than oneself. A farmer might work hard all year, tend his fields with care, make the proper offerings to the gods, and still, if the rains didn't come, there would be no harvest. His happiness, his flourishing, depended on things he could not control. This created a certain kind of wisdom, a wisdom of acceptance, a wisdom of knowing that human life was fragile and subject to forces larger than any individual will. The poets of this era, poets like Homer and Hesiod, sang of heroes and their fates, of how even the greatest men could be brought low by the whims of gods or the turning of fortune. Happiness, in this worldview, was not something you could guarantee for yourself. It was not entirely in your hands. This is important to understand because it sets the stage for what came later. The philosophers, who came after, the ones we'll spend time with tonight, were in some ways reacting to this older view. They were asking, is there a kind of happiness that doesn't depend on external things? Is there a way to flourish that remains steady even when fortune turns against us? But before we get to those philosophers and their careful answers, let's just sit for a moment with this older understanding. This sense that life is unpredictable, that we are small beneath the vastness of the sky, that the same sun that warms us can scorch us, that the same sea that feeds us can swallow us. There's something honest in this view, something that doesn't pretend we have more control than we actually do. The ancient farmer, the ancient sailor, the ancient mother watching her children grow, they all knew that happiness was mixed with vulnerability, that to be alive was to be subject to loss, to change, to the unexpected. And yet, even within this worldview, there was a kind of happiness available. It wasn't the happiness of certainty or control. It was the happiness of doing what one could do, of tending the field even though the rains might not come, of sailing even though the sea was dangerous, of loving even though everyone we love will someday die. It was a happiness that coexisted with uncertainty, a happiness that didn't require guarantees. Perhaps that's something worth remembering as we explore what came later. Even the most sophisticated philosophical systems were trying to capture something that ordinary people already knew in their bones, that happiness isn't about controlling everything, but about finding a way to be all right even when we can't control anything. Time passes slowly in these reflections. There's no need to rush toward any conclusion. We can let these ideas rest in the mind the way sunlight rests on stone, warming it gradually, changing it imperceptibly. The ancient world, with its slower rhythms, its longer nights, its dependence on the cycles of nature, knew something about patience that we've perhaps forgotten. They knew that wisdom doesn't come from reading one book or hearing one lecture. It comes from years of living, years of watching, years of returning again and again to the same questions with a little more experience each time. So let's not hurry. Let's move through these ideas the way one might walk through an ancient city at dusk, when the heat of the day has faded and everything is quiet, and the stones still hold the warmth of the sun. We're walking slowly, noticing details, pausing when something catches our attention, not trying to see everything at once, but letting the place reveal itself gradually, at its own pace. In this older world, before philosophy became a distinct discipline, happiness was understood through stories. The stories of the gods, the stories of heroes, the stories passed down from generation to generation around fires in the evening. These stories taught that happiness often comes mixed with sorrow, that the same life that brings joy also brings pain, that nobility isn't about avoiding suffering but about bearing it with dignity. Think of the heroes of the old tales. They weren't happy in the simple sense. Their lives were full of struggle, sacrifice, loss, and yet there was something in them. Something admirable, something that made people want to tell their stories for centuries. They had a rate, a Greek word that means excellence or virtue. They were fully themselves. They lived up to what they could be, and perhaps that was a kind of happiness, not the happiness of comfort, but the happiness of being fully alive, fully engaged, fully present to what life demanded of them. When we think of those heroes now, across thousands of years, there's something in their stories that still resonates, not because they were always victorious, not because everything worked out for them, but because they faced what they had to face. They didn't turn away, they didn't collapse, they endured. And in that endurance, in that facing of what must be faced, there was a kind of happiness, the happiness of not betraying oneself, the happiness of living with courage, the happiness of meaning. This understanding of happiness as something connected to virtue, to excellence, to living well rather than just feeling well, this would become central to the philosophical schools that developed later. But in these early times, it wasn't yet articulated as philosophy. It was simply how people thought, how they understood what made a life worth living. A man who showed cowardice in battle might survive, might even live comfortably afterward, but he wouldn't be happy in the deeper sense. He would know he had failed some essential test. A woman who betrayed her family for personal gain might prosper outwardly, but inside, she would carry the knowledge of her betrayal. Happiness, real happiness, required living in a way that you could respect, living according to values that meant something. The night is quiet as we think about these things. There's something settling about considering ideas that aren't urgent, ideas that have been thought about for thousands of years and will continue to be thought about for thousands more. We don't have to figure it all out tonight. We don't have to come to any conclusions. We're just here, thinking slowly, letting these old perspectives speak to us in their own way, in their own time. As philosophy began to emerge as a distinct practice, as thinkers began to question not just how things are, but why they are and what they should be, the question of happiness became more explicit, more examined. The early philosophers, the ones we call the pre-Socratics, were primarily concerned with understanding the nature of reality, the fundamental substance of the world, the principles by which things change and move. They asked, what is everything made of? Is it water, as Thales thought? Is it air? Is it fire? Is it something boundless and indefinite? These might not seem like questions about happiness, but in a way they were. Because underlying these questions was a deeper question. What kind of world do we live in? Is it orderly or chaotic? Is it governed by reason or by chance? And the answer to those questions shapes how we should live, what we can hope for, what happiness might mean. If the world is fundamentally orderly, governed by rational principles, then perhaps happiness consists in aligning ourselves with that order, in understanding it, in living according to it. If the world is fundamentally chaotic, random, indifferent to human concerns, then perhaps happiness is something we must create for ourselves, something that comes from within rather than from without. The pre-Socratic philosophers, in their investigations of nature, were laying the groundwork for the ethical questions that would come later. They were establishing that the world could be understood, that reason could grasp the principles of reality, and that human beings, possessing reason, had a special place in this cosmos. One of these early thinkers, Heraclitus, said that all things flow, that you cannot step into the same river twice, that change is the fundamental nature of reality. Everything is in flux, everything is becoming, nothing stays the same. If this is true, and most of us would agree that it is, what does it mean for happiness? It means that happiness cannot be found in trying to hold on to things, in trying to keep everything the same, in resisting change. A happiness based on external circumstances will constantly be undermined because circumstances constantly change. The wealth you have today might be gone tomorrow. The health you enjoy now might fail. The people you love will age, change, eventually die. If happiness depends on these things remaining constant, then happiness is impossible. But Heraclitus also said that within all this change, there is a logos, a rational principle, a pattern, an order. The river is always changing, but it's still the river. The fire is always consuming new fuel, but it's still fire. There is constancy within change, pattern within flux. And perhaps happiness is found there, in understanding and accepting the nature of things, in flowing with the river rather than trying to dam it, in recognizing that change is not the enemy of happiness, but simply the nature of existence. These ideas are old, very old, and yet they feel relevant. We too live in a world of constant change, perhaps even more rapid change than the ancients knew. We too struggle with impermanence, with loss, with the feeling that everything is slipping through our fingers. And the old wisdom, the wisdom that says happiness cannot be found in grasping, but only in flowing, in accepting, in understanding, this wisdom still speaks. It speaks quietly, patiently, the way old wisdom always speaks, not demanding to be heard, but simply offering itself, available to anyone who pauses long enough to listen. Another early philosopher, Democritus, is often called the laughing philosopher because he believed that cheerfulness was the goal of life. He said that happiness consists in cheerfulness, in a state of well-being and equilibrium of the soul. This might sound simple, almost trivial, but think about what he means. Not the cheerfulness that comes from external pleasures, not the excitement of getting what you want, but a deeper cheerfulness, a fundamental disposition of the soul that remains steady regardless of circumstances. He called it euthymia, a good state of the soul, a kind of inner contentment that doesn't depend on what happens to you, but comes from how you relate to what happens. Democritus was also one of the first atomists, one of the first to propose that everything in the universe is made of tiny, indivisible particles moving through void. In a universe made of atoms and void, where everything that happens is the result of natural causes, where even the gods, if they exist, are made of atoms and subject to natural law, there is no room for supernatural intervention, no room for fate in the old sense. This places the responsibility for happiness squarely on the human being. You cannot blame the gods for your unhappiness. You cannot say that fate has been unkind. The universe operates according to natural principles, and within that universe, you have the capacity to cultivate a good state of soul, to maintain cheerfulness, to find contentment. This is a remarkable shift in thinking. Happiness is no longer something granted or withheld by external powers. It's something you can develop within yourself, through understanding, through practice, through the right disposition of your soul. And this idea that happiness is primarily an internal state, that it depends more on how you think than on what happens to you, this would become central to the philosophical schools that followed. We're taking our time with these ideas, letting them unfold slowly, not rushing toward any destination. The ancient philosophers didn't rush. They spent their whole lives thinking about these questions, refining their understanding, teaching their students, writing their dialogues and treatises. And we have the gift of being able to sit with their conclusions, to let their wisdom settle into us without having to start from scratch, without having to figure it all out on our own. We can simply receive what they've given, turn it over in our minds, see how it feels, see if it resonates with our own experience. The night deepens as we continue. There's something appropriate about thinking about happiness in the quiet hours, when the distractions of the day have faded, when we're alone with our thoughts, when we can be honest about what actually brings us peace and what only promises to bring us peace but never quite delivers. The ancient philosophers often taught in the evening, after the work of the day was done, when students gathered to discuss ideas by lamplight. There was something intimate about it, something conducive to real thought, real conversation, real insight. And now we come to Socrates. Though Socrates himself wrote nothing, everything we know about him comes from others, primarily his student Plato. Socrates spent his life in Athens, in the 5th century before the Common Era, walking through the marketplace, engaging anyone who would talk with him in conversation about virtue, knowledge, justice, and happiness. He claimed to know nothing, but through his questions, he revealed that others knew less than they thought they knew. He was like a gadfly, he said, stinging the lazy horse of Athens into wakefulness, forcing people to examine their assumptions, to think clearly, to pursue truth. For Socrates, happiness was inseparable from virtue. You could not be happy, truly happy, if you lived unjustly, if you harmed others, if you betrayed your principles. It didn't matter how successful you were, how wealthy, how powerful, how admired. If you lived badly, you could not be happy. And conversely, if you lived virtuously, if you pursued wisdom and goodness, then you would be happy, truly happy, regardless of external circumstances. This was a radical claim, and it's still radical today. Socrates believed it so deeply that he died for it. When he was condemned to death on charges of corrupting the youth and impiety, he had the opportunity to escape, to flee Athens and live out his life in exile. But he chose to stay and drink the hemlock, because to flee would be to disobey the laws of Athens. And to disobey the law, even a law he believed to be unjust in this instance, would be to act unjustly himself, and he would rather die than live unjustly. This tells us something profound about what Socrates believed happiness to be. It's not about staying alive at any cost. It's not about comfort or pleasure or avoiding pain. It's about living with integrity, about being able to respect yourself, about never betraying what you know to be right. In the dialogue called The Apology, which records Socrates' defense at his trial, he says that the unexamined life is not worth living. If we simply go through life without questioning, without thinking about what we're doing and why, without examining our beliefs and values, then we're not really living in the fullest sense. We're just existing, going through the motions, driven by appetites and opinions and social pressures. To examine your life, to question yourself, to pursue wisdom even when it's uncomfortable, even when it challenges everything you thought you knew, this is what makes life worth living. And happiness, for Socrates, comes from this examined life, from the pursuit of wisdom, from the effort to become better, to understand more clearly, to live more virtuously. It's not a passive happiness that falls on you from outside. It's an active happiness that you create through your choices, through your commitment to truth and goodness, through your refusal to compromise your integrity for any external reward. There's something beautiful in this, something that feels true even across all the centuries that separate us from Socrates. When we think about the times we felt most deeply satisfied, most at peace with ourselves, often it's not when everything was going perfectly in our external life. It's when we did something difficult but right, when we stood up for something we believed in, when we were honest even though lying would have been easier, when we helped someone even though there was no reward for doing so. Those moments when we lived according to our values, when we were true to ourselves, those are the moments when happiness feels real, feels solid, feels like something that can't be taken away. Socrates teaches us that happiness isn't about what you have, but about who you are. And who you are isn't fixed. It's something you create through your choices, day by day, moment by moment. Every time you choose virtue over vice, every time you choose honesty over deception, every time you choose courage over fear, you're shaping yourself into someone who can be happy, truly happy, regardless of what life brings. This is a happiness that doesn't require perfect circumstances. It doesn't require that everything go your way. It only requires that you remain true to yourself, that you continue to pursue what's good and right and true. And that's always within your power. Circumstances might take everything else from you. They can take your wealth, your health, your reputation, your freedom, but they cannot take your virtue unless you give it up. And as long as you hold on to that, as long as you continue to choose rightly, to live well, to pursue wisdom, you retain the capacity for happiness. We can rest in this idea for a while. There's no need to move on quickly. The night is long and we have time. Let this understanding of Socratic happiness settle in. Happiness as virtue, happiness as integrity, happiness as living an examined life, happiness as something you create through your choices, rather than something that happens to you. It's a demanding view in some ways, because it places responsibility on you. You can't blame circumstances for your unhappiness if unhappiness comes from living badly. But it's also a liberating view, because it means happiness is always available to you, always within reach, as long as you're willing to examine yourself, to pursue wisdom, to choose virtue. Plato, Socrates' most famous student, took these ideas and developed them into an elaborate philosophical system. Plato founded the Academy in Athens, one of the first institutions of higher learning in the Western world, and he wrote dialogues that explored every aspect of philosophy, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, politics, aesthetics. But running through all of Plato's work is the question of the good life, the question of happiness, the question of how human beings can flourish. For Plato, happiness comes from the harmony of the soul. He believed the soul has three parts: the rational part, which seeks truth and wisdom; the spirited part, which gives us courage, ambition, the capacity for righteous anger; and the appetitive part, which is concerned with bodily desires, with food, drink, sex, comfort. Each part has its proper role, and happiness consists in each part doing what it's supposed to do, with reason governing the whole. Think of it like a chariot, which is an image Plato himself uses. The rational part is the charioteer, holding the reins. The spirited part and the appetitive part are like two horses pulling the chariot. One horse is noble and well-behaved, responding to the charioteer's guidance. The other horse is unruly, constantly trying to veer off course toward whatever attracts it. The charioteer's job is to direct both horses, to keep them working together, to guide the chariot toward its destination. When this is happening, when reason is in control, when spirit supports reason, when appetite is moderated and kept in its proper place, then the soul is in harmony and the person is happy. But when the parts of the soul are in conflict, when appetite overwhelms reason, when we're driven by desires we know are harmful, when we do things we know we'll regret, then the soul is in discord and we're unhappy. Not just unhappy because we don't get what we want, but unhappy because we're internally divided, at war with ourselves, pulled in different directions. Plato believed that injustice, vice, living badly, these things fundamentally damage the soul, create disharmony within it, and therefore make happiness impossible, regardless of external circumstances. He tells a story in the Republic about a man named Gyges, who finds a ring that makes him invisible. With this ring, Gyges can do anything he wants without being caught. He seduces the queen, kills the king, takes the throne. From an external perspective, he's successful, powerful, he got everything he wanted. But Plato argues that Gyges cannot be happy, because by acting unjustly, by betraying every principle of right conduct, he has corrupted his own soul. He has created disharmony within himself. Even if no one ever knows what he's done, even if he's never punished, he has harmed himself in a way that makes happiness impossible. This might seem counterintuitive. We're used to thinking that happiness depends on getting what we want, on success, on pleasure, on external things going. Well, Plato is saying no. Happiness depends on being a certain kind of person, having a certain kind of soul, a soul in harmony with itself, a soul governed by reason, a soul oriented toward what's genuinely good, rather than just toward what appears good in the moment. And what is genuinely good for Plato? Ultimately, it's the form of the good itself, the highest reality, the source of all value and meaning, the sun of the intelligible world. This gets into the more metaphysical aspects of Plato's thought, the theory of forms, the idea that the physical world we perceive with our senses is just a shadow or reflection of a higher reality, a realm of perfect, eternal, unchanging forms. The form of the good is the highest of these forms, and everything else derives its goodness from it. For Plato, the philosopher, the lover of wisdom, is the person who turns away from the shadows and tries to apprehend these higher realities. It's not easy. It requires discipline, education, a complete reorientation of the soul. But this is where true happiness lies, in contemplation of what's ultimately real, ultimately true, ultimately good. The pleasures of the body are fleeting and never fully satisfying. The honors and wealth that people pursue in the political realm are unstable and subject to the whims of fortune. But the truths discovered by reason, the beauty of knowledge, the good itself, these are eternal, unchanging, fully satisfying. This might sound abstract, detached from ordinary life, but there's something to it. Think about the satisfaction that comes from understanding something, really understanding it, seeing how things fit together, grasping a truth that was hidden before. That satisfaction is different from sensory pleasure. It doesn't fade the way pleasure does. It doesn't leave you wanting more. It feels complete, sufficient. Plato is suggesting that if we orient our lives toward this kind of understanding, toward wisdom, toward knowledge of what's truly good, then we'll find a happiness that's deeper and more stable than anything else. But again, this requires harmony within the soul. It requires that reason be strong enough to govern, that we're not constantly pulled away from what we know is good by appetites or emotions. It requires discipline, practice, education. It requires living philosophically, which for Plato means living according to reason, pursuing wisdom, moderating desires, cultivating virtue. The shadows lengthen as we consider Plato's vision of happiness. It's a demanding vision, one that requires transformation, education, discipline. But it's also a hopeful vision because it suggests that genuine, lasting happiness is possible, that there's something in the universe, the good itself, that we can align ourselves with, and in that alignment find fulfillment. We don't have to remain trapped in the shadows, driven by appetites and opinions. We can turn toward the light. We can ascend toward understanding. We can bring our souls into harmony and thereby find peace. This process takes time. Plato didn't think you could read a book and become wise. He thought education was a lifelong process, a turning turning of the whole soul from darkness to light. And perhaps that's comforting in a way, knowing that wisdom isn't something you're supposed to achieve quickly, knowing that it's all right to be on the way, to be learning, to be gradually coming into greater understanding. The goal isn't to arrive at some final state of perfect knowledge. The goal is to be oriented in the right direction, to be moving toward the light, to be pursuing wisdom rather than illusion. And in that pursuit, there is happiness, not just when you finally understand everything, but in the journey itself, in the process of learning, questioning, discovering, growing. Each step toward greater understanding is its own reward. Each insight brings satisfaction. Each time you bring a little more order to your soul, a little more harmony, you experience a deepening peace, a deepening contentment, a sense that you're living as you should be living, that your life has direction and meaning. We rest here for a while, in this Platonic vision, letting it settle, not trying to master it or fully comprehend it, just allowing it to be present in our minds, allowing it to suggest possibilities, to open perspectives. The night continues its slow progression, and we continue ours, moving gently through these ancient ideas, these old approaches to the question of happiness, not hurrying, not seeking quick answers, but dwelling, contemplating, allowing understanding to develop at its own pace. Aristotle was Plato's student, and he spent 20 years in Plato's academy before eventually founding his own school, the Lyceum, in Athens. Aristotle's approach to philosophy was more systematic, more empirical than Plato's. Where Plato looked to eternal forms, Aristotle looked to the natural world, to what can be observed and studied. His works cover an astonishing range of subjects: logic, metaphysics, ethics, politics, biology, physics, poetry, rhetoric. He was, in a sense, the first scientist as well as one of the greatest philosophers, and his influence on Western thought cannot be overstated. In his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle presents his most complete account of happiness, of eudaimonia, of human flourishing. For Aristotle, happiness is the highest good, the ultimate end that we pursue for its own sake, not for the sake of anything else. We pursue honor, wealth, pleasure, knowledge, but we pursue these things because we think they'll make us happy. Happiness is what we're ultimately after. It's the final goal, the end of all action. But what is happiness? Aristotle is careful to distinguish it from pleasure. Pleasure is fleeting. It comes and goes. It depends on external things. Happiness, in Aristotle's sense, is not a momentary feeling, but a state of being, a condition of the whole life. You can't say someone is happy based on a single moment, or even a single day. Happiness is something you can only attribute to a whole life, a life well lived, a life of flourishing. He even says that we can't judge whether someone was happy until after they've died, until we can look at the whole arc of their life and see whether it was, overall, a life of virtue and fulfillment. For Aristotle, happiness consists in activity of soul in accordance with virtue. This is his famous definition, and it's worth unpacking slowly. First, happiness is an activity, not a state of rest. It's not something you achieve and then stop. It's not like climbing a mountain and reaching the summit and then just staying there. It's an ongoing exercise of your capacities, a continuous living in a certain way. Second, it's activity of soul, which for Aristotle means the distinctively human activity, the activity of reason, the exercise of our rational capacities. Plants have souls in the sense that they have life, they grow and reproduce. Animals have souls in that they have life plus perception and movement. But humans have rational souls. Our distinctive function is to think, to reason, to understand. So happiness, for Aristotle, involves exercising this rational capacity. Third, and crucially, this activity must be in accordance with virtue. Virtue, or arete, means excellence. It's about being good at being human, excelling at the human function. And what does that mean? For Aristotle, virtue is a disposition to choose the mean between extremes. Courage, for example, is the mean between cowardice and recklessness. Generosity is the mean between stinginess and wastefulness. Proper pride is the mean between excessive humility and arrogance. Each virtue is a kind of balance, a sweet spot between too much and too little. And these virtues are developed through practice, through habituation. You become courageous by doing courageous acts, by practicing courage until it becomes part of your character. You become generous by practicing generosity. You don't become virtuous by reading about virtue or thinking about it abstractly. You become virtuous by living virtuously, by making the right choices over and over until they become second nature, until you're the kind of person who naturally chooses rightly without having to struggle or deliberate each time. So Aristotelian happiness requires virtue, and virtue requires practice, and practice requires time. You can't be happy overnight. You become happy if you do, through a lifetime of virtuous activity, through years of developing good character, through consistently choosing well. This is both demanding and reassuring. It's demanding because it requires sustained effort, discipline, attention to how you're living. But it's reassuring because it means happiness is something you build, something you have agency in creating, something that develops through the choices you make every day. Aristotle also believed that happiness requires certain external goods. Unlike the Stoics, who we'll come to later, Aristotle didn't think virtue was sufficient for happiness. He thought you also needed things like health, friends, sufficient wealth, a reasonably stable political situation. You can be virtuous in difficult circumstances, but you can't fully flourish. A person suffering from severe illness or extreme poverty or complete isolation might be virtuous, but can't be completely happy. Happiness requires not just internal goods like virtue, but also external goods that enable you to exercise virtue and fulfill your potential. This seems more realistic, perhaps, than the Stoic view that virtue alone is enough. We do seem to need certain things to flourish. Health matters. Relationships matter. Having enough resources to live decently matters. Aristotle is acknowledging this, while still maintaining that virtue is the most important component of happiness, the one that contributes most to flourishing, the one we have most control over. He also distinguishes between different kinds of life, different ways people pursue happiness. Some people pursue a life of pleasure, seeking gratification of bodily appetites. This, Aristotle thinks, is not really a human life, but an animal life, because it doesn't exercise what's distinctively human, the rational capacity. Others pursue a life of honor, seeking recognition, status, political success. This is better because it involves more distinctively human activities, but it's still unsatisfying because honor depends on others' opinions, which are unstable and often wrong. The best life, for Aristotle, is the life of contemplation, the philosophical life, the life devoted to understanding, to the exercise of reason, at its highest, to the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom. This contemplative life is happiness in its purest form, because it's the exercise of our highest capacity, reason, directed toward the highest objects, eternal truths. It's self-sufficient, not dependent on others or on external circumstances. It's continuous. You can contemplate for long stretches of time in a way you can't continuously pursue honor or pleasure. And it's pleasant in a deep way, because the activity itself is satisfying, not just a means to something else. But Aristotle is realistic. Few people can spend all their time in contemplation. We have bodies. We live in communities. We have practical responsibilities. So the second best life is the life of moral virtue, the life of the good citizen, the person who participates in their community, acts justly, displays courage, temperance, generosity, all the moral virtues. This life is also a good life, also a form of happiness, though not quite as exalted as the pure contemplative life. What's striking about Aristotle's account is its balance, its nuance, its recognition that happiness is complex, that it has multiple components, that it requires both internal development and external support, that it takes time and effort and luck. He doesn't promise that happiness is easy or guaranteed. He simply describes what it is and what it requires, and leaves it to each person to pursue it as best they can, given their circumstances. As we sit with Aristotle's ideas, there's a sense of something substantial here, something comprehensive. He's not offering a simple formula or a quick fix. He's offering a vision of a whole life lived well, a life of developing your character, exercising your capacities, contributing to your community, pursuing understanding, finding the mean in your actions, building virtue through practice, and in all of this, over time, achieving a state of flourishing, of deep and lasting contentment, of being fully and excellently human. This takes time to sink in. This Aristotelian vision, it's rich and layered, and there's no need to grasp it all at once. We can let it work on us slowly, let it raise questions, let it resonate with our own experience or challenge our assumptions. The night is quiet, and we have all the time we need to think, to ponder, to consider what it would mean to live in accordance with virtue, to develop our character over years, to aim at flourishing rather than just momentary pleasure or success. The hours pass gently as we move deeper into these reflections. There's something meditative about this process, something that quiets the mind, something that creates space for real thought. In our daily lives, we're often too busy, too distracted, too overwhelmed by demands and stimuli to really think about what matters, about what would make our lives good, about what happiness actually is. But here, in the stillness, with the wisdom of the ancients to guide us, we can think about these things. We can consider them without pressure, without judgment, without any need to reach a conclusion. And now we come to Epicurus, and with him, a different approach to happiness, one that might surprise those who think of Epicureanism as synonymous with hedonism, with the pursuit of pleasure without restraint. This is a misunderstanding of what Epicurus actually taught. Yes, he believed that pleasure is the highest good, the goal of life, but he had a very specific understanding of what pleasure is and how it's achieved. Epicurus founded his school in Athens, not far from Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum, but his school was different. It met in a garden, it was more informal, more communal, and it welcomed everyone, even women and slaves, which was unusual for the time. On the gate of the garden was inscribed, "Stranger, here you will do well to tarry. Here our highest good is pleasure." But the pleasure Epicurus taught about was not what that inscription might suggest to a modern reader. For Epicurus, pleasure is the absence of pain. That's the fundamental definition. The greatest pleasure is ataraxia, a Greek word meaning tranquility, freedom from disturbance, a state of calm and peace. Not excitement, not stimulation, not the intense gratification of desires, but simply the absence of suffering, the presence of peace. He distinguished between kinetic pleasures, which are the pleasures of satisfying a desire, like eating when you're hungry or drinking when you're thirsty, and katastomatic pleasures, which are the pleasures of a stable state, like not being hungry or thirsty, being healthy, being safe, being at peace. Kinetic pleasures are fine, but they're limited. Once you've satisfied the hunger, eating more doesn't increase the pleasure. It actually becomes painful. The pleasure has a natural limit. And kinetic pleasures, by definition, involve first being in a state of lack or pain, hunger, thirst, and then satisfying it. So they're actually a mixture of pain and pleasure. Katastomatic pleasure, on the other hand, is pure pleasure, unmixed with pain. It's the pleasure of simply being, existing without disturbance, without unfulfilled desires, without pain or fear. This is the pleasure Epicurus recommends we pursue, not wild indulgence, which he thinks actually leads to pain. Excess leads to sickness, regret, dependency, but a simple life, free from unnecessary desires, focused on what's natural and necessary. Food, shelter, friendship, these are natural and necessary. Luxury, wealth, fame, these are neither natural nor necessary. They're empty desires, and pursuing them leads not to satisfaction, but to endless craving and anxiety. Epicurus himself lived very simply. He was content with bread and water, and occasionally some cheese as a treat. He lived with his friends in the garden, discussing philosophy, enjoying simple pleasures, free from the anxieties that plagued most people. And he claimed to be perfectly happy, even when he was dying from a painful illness, because he had cultivated a mind that was free from fear and rich in pleasant memories of philosophical conversation with friends. Two things in particular rob people of tranquility, according to Epicurus: fear of the gods and fear of death. Most people in his time lived in terror of the gods, thinking they needed to constantly appease them, worrying that they might anger them, fearing punishment in this life or the next. Epicurus argued that the gods, if they exist, are perfectly happy and therefore completely unconcerned with human affairs. They don't need our worship, they don't punish us, they don't intervene in the world, so there's no reason to fear them. This was a radical claim, one that got him accused of atheism, though technically he wasn't denying the gods' existence, just their relevance to human life. As for death, Epicurus had an elegant argument. Death is nothing to us. When we exist, death is not yet present, and when death is present, we do not exist. Therefore, death is nothing to the living or to the dead, since it does not exist for the living, and the dead no longer are. In other words, we never actually experience death. While we're alive, we're not dead, so there's nothing to fear. And when we're dead, we don't exist, so we can't experience anything, including the badness of being dead. Death is simply non-existence, and non-existence can't harm us, because we won't be there to be harmed. This argument might seem too clever, too simple, but there's something to it. Much of our anxiety about death isn't actually about death itself, the state of being dead, but about dying, about the process, about losing what we have, about leaving people we love. These are understandable fears, but they're fears about life, not about death. Death itself, the actual state of non-being, isn't something we need to fear, because we won't experience it. And if we can internalize this, really accept it, then a huge source of anxiety dissolves. We can live without that constant background dread, without that shadow looming over everything, without wasting our precious time fearing something that will never touch us. With fear of the gods and fear of death removed, what remains? A simple life lived with friends, enjoying modest pleasures, discussing ideas, existing in a state of tranquility. This is Epicurean happiness. It's modest, quiet, undramatic. It doesn't promise great achievements or intense experiences. It promises peace, contentment, freedom from disturbance. And for many people, that might be exactly what they need, exactly what would make them happy. Epicurus also valued friendship very highly. He said that friendship is immortal, that of all the things wisdom provides for a happy life, the greatest is friendship. The Epicurean community was built around friendship, around a group of people living together, supporting each other, enjoying each other's company, discussing philosophy, not the formal hierarchical relationships of the political world, but genuine friendship based on affection, trust, shared values. There's something appealing in this, something that still resonates. The idea that happiness doesn't require wealth or fame or power, that it's available to anyone who lives simply, moderates their desires, cultivates friendships, frees themselves from irrational fears. The idea that the best pleasure is peace, that the goal isn't to have more and more experiences, more and more stimulation, but simply to be at peace, to be content, to be free from disturbance. In our world, which is so often frantic, so driven by consumerism, by the idea that we need more and more to be happy, Epicurus offers an alternative vision, a vision of sufficiency, of simplicity, of finding happiness not in accumulation, but in subtraction, in removing what disturbs us, in limiting our desires to what's natural and necessary, in cultivating tranquility rather than chasing excitement. We can rest in this vision for a while, this Epicurean garden, this space of simplicity and peace. There's no rush to move on. The ideas are here, available, offering themselves. We can take what resonates, leave what doesn't, simply let these ancient perspectives wash over us, each one offering its own approach to the question of happiness, each one revealing some aspect of this fundamental human concern. The night deepens, and with it, our reflections deepen. We're not trying to decide which philosophical school is right, which approach to happiness is correct. We're simply exploring, opening ourselves to different possibilities, different ways of thinking about what makes a life good, what brings contentment, what allows a human being to flourish. Each philosopher, each school saw something true, emphasized some aspect of the complex reality of human happiness, and we can learn from all of them, can take something from each, can let their collective wisdom inform our own understanding. From here we turn to Stoicism, perhaps the most influential of the ancient philosophies, at least in terms of its impact on how people actually lived. Stoicism was founded by Zeno of Citium in Athens, around 300 BCE, and it attracted followers from all walks of life, slaves like Epictetus, emperors like Marcus Aurelius, statesmen, soldiers, ordinary citizens. It was a practical philosophy, concerned not just with abstract theory, but with how to live well, how to be happy, how to maintain peace of mind in a difficult and unpredictable world. The Stoics agreed with Aristotle and Plato that virtue is central to happiness, but they went further, claiming that virtue is not just necessary for happiness but sufficient. Virtue alone is enough for happiness. Nothing else is truly good or truly bad. Health, wealth, reputation, even life itself, these are neither good nor bad, but indifferent. They're preferred or dispreferred. Certainly we'd rather be healthy than sick, rich than poor, but they don't affect our happiness, our eudaimonia, because happiness depends entirely on virtue, and virtue depends entirely on our choices, our intentions, our character, and these are always within our control. This is the central Stoic doctrine. Distinguish between what's in your control and what's not, and focus all your attention, all your concern, on what's in your control. What's in your control? Your own thoughts, judgments, desires, aversions, choices. What's not in your control? Everything else. Your body, your property, your reputation, other people's opinions, the weather, the economy, whether you get sick, whether you die. None of this is up to you, so none of it should disturb you. Epictetus, who taught in Rome in the 1st century CE, put it most clearly. Some things are up to us and some things are not up to us. Our opinions are up to us, and our impulses, desires, aversions. In short, whatever is our own doing. Our bodies are not up to us, nor are our possessions, our reputations, or our public offices, or that is, whatever is not our own doing. And then he adds the crucial point. The things that are up to us are by nature free, unhindered, unimpeded. The things not up to us are weak, enslaved, hindered, not our own. If you focus your desires on things not in your control, you will inevitably be frustrated, disappointed, disturbed. You'll be enslaved to fortune, dependent on things you can't control for your happiness. But if you focus only on what's in your control, if you desire only to act virtuously, to make good choices, to maintain your integrity, then you're free. Nothing can stop you from being virtuous. Circumstances might be difficult, but they can't prevent you from responding with wisdom, justice, courage, temperance. And if you're virtuous, you're happy, according to the Stoics, completely and perfectly happy, regardless of any external circumstances. This is a bold claim, perhaps the boldest claim about happiness in all of ancient philosophy. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his private journal while on military campaigns, dealing with plague, war, betrayal, the tremendous responsibilities of ruling an empire, he keeps reminding himself of this Stoic truth. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The external world is not in his control, but his mind is. His judgments, his responses, his character, these are his, and these are enough for happiness. How is this possible? How can someone be happy in terrible circumstances? The Stoics' answer is that circumstances themselves are neither good nor bad. It's only our judgments about them that make them seem good or bad. If you lose your money, that's not actually bad. It's just an external event, a change in circumstances. What makes it bad is your judgment that it's bad, your belief that you needed that money to be happy, your fear about the future, your shame about not being wealthy. Change your judgment, and the badness disappears. This doesn't mean pretending bad things are good. It means recognizing that external things are indifferent, that they don't affect what really matters, your virtue, your character, your inner citadel of peace. If you're insulted, the insult itself doesn't harm you. It's just words, sounds in the air. What harms you is your judgment that you've been harmed, your emotional reaction, your desire for revenge. If you don't judge the insult as bad, if you remain indifferent to it, it passes by without disturbing you. Epictetus tells his students, if someone hands you a cup and you drop it and it breaks, you don't get upset. You just think, oh well, things break. But if someone insults you, you get very upset. Why? Both are external events. Neither is in your control. You should be no more disturbed by the insult than by the broken cup. The disturbance comes from your judgment, from your belief that your reputation matters, that others' opinions of you affect your worth. But they don't. Only your virtue affects your worth, and insults don't touch your virtue, unless you let them. This takes practice. The Stoics didn't think it was easy. They thought it required constant training, daily exercise, what they called ascesis, spiritual practice. Every morning, Marcus Aurelius would remind himself, today I will encounter ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful people, but I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and I recognize that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own, not because we share blood or parentage, but because we both partake of reason and a share of the divine. Therefore, none of them can hurt me, because they can't implicate me in ugliness, nor can I become angry at someone who shares my nature. Every morning, preparing his mind, reminding himself of Stoic principles, so that when difficulties arise, he'll be ready. And every evening, reviewing the day. Did I get angry today? Why? What judgment caused that anger? How could I have responded better? This constant practice, this daily discipline, gradually transforms the mind, makes it more resilient, more peaceful, less reactive. The Stoics also practiced negative visualization, imagining loss, imagining difficulty, so that they'd be prepared if it happened, and so that they'd appreciate what they have while they have it. Seneca recommends setting aside certain days to practice poverty, eating simple food, wearing rough clothes, sleeping on a hard bed, so that you prove to yourself that it's not so bad, that you don't need luxury, that you could handle it if your wealth disappeared. This isn't pessimism, it's realism and preparation. Everything is temporary. Everyone you love will die. You will die. Why not acknowledge this? Accept it, so that you're not devastated when it happens. Why not enjoy what you have now, while you have it, with the full knowledge that it's temporary, which makes it even more precious? There's a famous Stoic thought experiment. Imagine that everything you have has been lent to you and will be taken back. Your possessions, your health, your loved ones, even your life. They're not really yours. They're on loan. So use them well, appreciate them, but don't cling to them. Don't imagine they're permanent. When they're taken back, as they inevitably will be, you won't be devastated because you expected it, because you never forgot they weren't really yours to keep. This might sound cold, detached, unemotional, but the Stoics weren't advocating for emotional suppression. They weren't saying don't love people or don't enjoy things. They were saying love people and enjoy things with the full awareness of their impermanence, with the understanding that your happiness doesn't depend on keeping them forever, with the freedom that comes from non-attachment. Love deeply, but don't need. Enjoy fully, but don't cling. Value appropriately, understanding that people are infinitely more valuable than things, that virtue is more valuable than anything. External, that your inner peace is something no one can take from you. The Stoic sage, the perfectly wise and virtuous person, is rare, perhaps impossible, but they're the ideal, the goal. The sage is completely happy, completely free, completely virtuous. Nothing disturbs them, because they judge nothing external as good or bad. They act always with perfect wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. They're at peace with themselves and with the world, accepting everything that happens as the will of the universe, seeing themselves as part of a rational, ordered cosmos, playing their assigned role with excellence. Most of us are not sages. We're students of philosophy, making progress, sometimes succeeding, often failing, but always returning to the practice, always trying to align our lives with reason and virtue. And that's okay. That's enough. The effort itself is valuable. The daily practice of examining your judgments, moderating your desires, responding to difficulties with courage and wisdom. This is living philosophically, and this brings a kind of happiness, a deepening peace, even if we never achieve the perfect tranquility of the sage. Stoicism spread throughout the ancient world because it offered something people needed, a way to maintain dignity, integrity, and inner peace in a world that was often brutal, arbitrary, and beyond individual control. It didn't promise that life would be easy or that you could control what happened to you. It promised that you could control how you responded, and that was enough. You could be free even as a slave, like Epictetus. You could be at peace even as an emperor burdened with impossible responsibilities, like Marcus Aurelius. You could face death, exile, loss, persecution, and remain unbroken. Remain yourself. Remain virtuous. Remain happy in the deep Stoic sense of living in accordance with reason and nature. We sit with this for a long time, this Stoic vision of happiness as inner freedom, as virtue sufficient unto itself, as peace maintained through right judgment and daily practice. There's something powerful here, something that has sustained people through centuries of hardship, something that still speaks to us today when we feel overwhelmed by circumstances we can't control, when we're anxious about the future, when we're disturbed by others' actions or opinions. The Stoics offer us a kind of invincibility, not by making us impervious to hardship, but by teaching us that hardship doesn't have to disturb our peace, that our happiness doesn't depend on external circumstances, that we can always choose virtue, and in that choice, find freedom and contentment. It's a demanding philosophy, requiring constant practice, unflinching honesty with ourselves, courage to face reality without illusions. But it's also a liberating philosophy, offering a happiness that can't be taken away, that doesn't depend on luck or others. Actions that's always available as long as we continue to choose rightly. The hours continue their gentle passage. We're deep into the night now, deep into these reflections, and there's no end in sight, no pressure to conclude, no need to wrap things up neatly. We're simply here, with these ideas, letting them work on us, letting them reveal their wisdom slowly, at their own pace. Ancient philosophy isn't something you consume quickly. It's something you live with, something you return to again and again, something that gradually reshapes how you see yourself and the world. From Stoicism, we move to skepticism, another ancient school that offered its own path to happiness. The skeptics were not skeptical in the modern sense of simply doubting everything. They were skeptical about the possibility of certain knowledge, about dogmatic claims, about people who said they knew the truth. The skeptics believed that for every argument, there's an equally strong counter-argument, that reason can't definitively settle most questions, that the wise course is to suspend judgment, to neither affirm nor deny, to remain in a state of inquiry. This might seem like it would lead to paralysis or unhappiness, but the skeptics claimed the opposite. They said that suspending judgment leads to ataraxia, that same tranquility the Epicureans sought. When you stop trying to figure out what's absolutely true, when you stop worrying about whether your beliefs are correct, when you let go of the need for certainty, a kind of peace descends. You're no longer anxious about defending your positions, no longer disturbed by contradicting opinions, no longer tied to dogmas that might be wrong. The skeptic Pyrrho, who lived around the same time as Epicurus, reportedly achieved such equanimity that nothing disturbed him. Once, he was on a ship during a terrible storm, and while everyone else panicked, he remained calm, pointing to a pig that was calmly eating from its trough, saying that this was how the wise person should be, undisturbed by things that don't matter. The story might be exaggerated, but it illustrates the skeptic ideal: complete tranquility through suspension of judgment. How did they live without beliefs? They didn't make dogmatic claims, but they followed appearances, customs, and natural inclinations. If something appears sweet, they'd eat it, not because they believed it was truly sweet in some metaphysical sense, but simply because it appeared that way. They followed the customs of their society, not because they believed these customs were truly right, but because it was practical to do so. They avoided dogmatism while still functioning in the world. The later skeptic Sextus Empiricus wrote extensively about this. He described how for any philosophical question, you can construct equally convincing arguments on both sides, leading to equipollence, a balance of reasons, which leads to suspension of judgment, which leads to tranquility. The skeptics didn't seek happiness through acquiring knowledge or virtue or pleasure. They found happiness by giving up the quest for certainty, by accepting that they didn't know and didn't need to know, by being content with appearances and probabilities, by not committing themselves to any doctrine. This is a radical approach to happiness, one that removes the entire burden of having to be right, of having to know, of having to defend your beliefs against attack. If you hold your beliefs lightly, as provisional, as subject to revision, as merely how things appear to you at the moment, then you're free from the anxiety that comes with certainty, the anxiety of possibly being wrong, the anxiety of having your worldview challenged. In our time, when people are so often convinced they're right, when public discourse is so polarized, when everyone seems to have strong opinions they're willing to fight over, the skeptic approach offers something refreshing. What if we didn't need to be so sure? What if we could hold our beliefs more lightly? What if we could listen to opposing views without feeling threatened? What if we could admit we don't know and be at peace with that? The skeptics wouldn't say this is true, of course. They'd say this is how things appear. This is a possible approach, but they wouldn't claim it's the definitive answer to the question of happiness. That would be dogmatic. They'd simply offer their perspective, note that it seems to have brought them tranquility, and leave it at that, open to being wrong, open to other approaches, committed to nothing except continued inquiry and openness. We rest here briefly, in this skeptical space, this space of not knowing, of suspended judgment, of lightness and openness. It's a different kind of peace than the Stoics offered. The Stoics were certain about virtue, certain about the distinction between what's in our control and what's not, certain about living according to reason. The skeptics weren't certain about anything, and they found peace in that uncertainty, in that freedom from the burden of belief. Both approaches have something to offer. Perhaps we can take from the Stoics the practice of examining our judgments, of focusing on what's in our control, of cultivating virtue. And perhaps we can take from the skeptics the practice of holding our beliefs lightly, of being open to being wrong, of not needing absolute certainty, of finding peace in inquiry rather than conclusion. The ancient world had room for all these approaches, all these schools, all these different paths to happiness. People could choose the philosophy that suited their temperament, their circumstances, their needs. And perhaps we can do the same, not limiting ourselves to one school, but learning from all of them, taking what helps, leaving what doesn't, creating our own synthesis, our own approach to living well. In the later ancient period, Neoplatonism emerged, a development of Plato's philosophy that incorporated elements from Aristotle, from Stoicism, from Eastern mysticism. Plotinus, the founder of Neoplatonism, taught in Rome in the 3rd century CE, and his thought represents one of the peaks of ancient philosophical reflection on happiness and the nature of reality. For Plotinus, happiness comes from union with the One, the ultimate source of all reality, beyond being, beyond thought, beyond language. The One emanates, like light from the sun, creating all of reality in descending levels. First the nous, or divine mind, containing the Platonic forms. Then the world soul, animating all living things. Then the material world, the furthest from the One, the dimmest reflection of its light. Human beings exist at all these levels. We have bodies, subject to the material world. We have souls, participating in the world soul. We have minds, capable of contemplating the eternal forms. And we have a highest part, a capacity for mystical union with the One itself. Happiness, for Plotinus, is a return journey, a turning away from the material world, from the body and its concerns, and an ascent back toward the source. This is achieved through philosophy, through contemplation, through purification of the soul, through moral and intellectual discipline. As we ascend, we become happier, because we're moving toward what's most real, most true, most good. The pleasures of the body are the lowest, the least real, the least satisfying. Higher are the pleasures of moral virtue, of living well in the world. Higher still are the intellectual pleasures, the joy of understanding, of contemplating truth. And highest of all is the mystical experience of union with the One, where all distinctions dissolve, where subject and object merge, where the soul finds perfect peace, perfect joy, perfect fulfillment. This mystical union can't really be described, because it's beyond language, beyond concepts. It's not an experience in the ordinary sense, because there's no longer an experiencer distinct from what's experienced. It's complete unity, complete simplicity, complete rest. Plotinus himself reportedly achieved this union several times during his life, and he described it as the goal of all philosophy, the ultimate happiness, beyond which there's nothing higher to seek. This is a very different vision from the practical ethics of the Stoics or the tranquil garden of the Epicureans. This is mystical, transcendent, aiming at nothing less than union with the divine source of all reality. And yet, it's still firmly within the philosophical tradition. Plotinus argues for his views, constructs elaborate metaphysical systems, engages with earlier philosophers, teaches students. He's not just a mystic, but a rigorous thinker, and his Neoplatonism represents an attempt to answer the question of happiness at the deepest level, not just how to live well in the world, but how to transcend the world, how to return to the source, how to find ultimate and eternal fulfillment. For Plotinus, the philosophical life is a preparation for this return. Every act of contemplation, every effort to understand, every moment of rising above bodily concerns and material attachments is a step toward the One. And even before the final mystical union, this ascending life brings happiness because we're moving in the right direction, because we're becoming more than we were, because we're remembering our true nature, our divine origin. This Neoplatonic vision influenced Christianity, particularly in the mystical traditions, and it influenced Islamic and Jewish philosophy as well. It offered a way to reconcile philosophical reason with religious devotion, to see the philosophical life as a spiritual path, to understand happiness not just as earthly flourishing but as eternal. Beatitude, union with God, the beatific vision. We can appreciate the grandeur of this vision even if we're not inclined to mysticism. There's something in the idea that happiness increases as we turn toward what's higher, what's more real, what's more true. Even in secular terms, we might recognize that intellectual and aesthetic pleasures are more satisfying than mere sensory pleasures, that understanding brings a deeper contentment than distraction, that creating beauty or pursuing truth or helping others gives us more lasting fulfillment than pursuing comfort or status or wealth. Plotinus is pointing to this hierarchy of goods, this sense that not all pleasures are equal, that some are higher, deeper, more real than others, and that the happiest life is one oriented toward the highest goods, whatever we take those to be. Whether we accept his metaphysics or not, we can perhaps accept the basic insight that happiness comes from transcendence, from rising above our lower nature, from connecting with what's greater than ourselves, whether that's God or truth or beauty or the good of humanity or the cosmos itself. The night is very deep now, very quiet, and we're very far into this exploration of ancient happiness. We've traveled through pre-Socratic wisdom, through Socrates' examined life, through Plato's harmonious soul, through Aristotle's virtuous activity, through Epicurus's tranquil garden, through Stoic inner freedom, through skeptical suspension of judgment, through Neoplatonic mystical union. Each philosopher, each school, has offered something, has illuminated some aspect of what happiness might be, how it might be achieved, what it requires from us. And perhaps that's the point. Not that any one of them has the complete and final answer, but that happiness is complex, multifaceted, approached differently by different people in different circumstances. Some of us might find happiness more in contemplation, others more in action. Some might need the discipline of Stoicism, others the simplicity of Epicureanism. Some might thrive on Aristotelian virtue, others on skeptical openness. We're all different, and perhaps we need different philosophical medicines for our particular ailments, our particular situations, our particular natures. What unites all these approaches is the conviction that happiness is worth pursuing, that it can be achieved, at least to some degree, through understanding, through practice, through living in accordance with truth and reason. None of them promise that happiness is easy. All of them require effort, discipline, self-examination, often a complete reorientation of values and priorities. But all of them insist that it's possible, that we're not condemned to unhappiness, that we have the capacity to live well, to flourish, to find peace and contentment and joy if we're willing to do what's necessary. The ancient world was not an easy place to live. Life expectancy was short. Medicine was primitive. Wars were frequent. Political instability was common. Most people lived in poverty. And yet, these philosophers found ways to be happy, or at least to think clearly about what happiness is and how to achieve it. Their teachings weren't idle speculation but practical wisdom, tested in their own lives, offered to their students and readers as genuine help, as real guidance for living well in a difficult world. And their wisdom remains. It has survived for over 2,000 years, been translated into every language, studied by countless generations, because it speaks to something permanent in human nature, something that doesn't change despite all the changes in technology, politics, economics, culture. We still want to be happy. We still struggle with the same fundamental questions. How should I live? What really matters? What will bring me lasting satisfaction? How can I maintain peace of mind? In an uncertain world, how should I face suffering, loss, death? The ancient philosophers can't give us simple answers, because there are no simple answers, but they can give us frameworks for thinking, practices for living, examples of people who took these questions seriously and devoted their lives to answering them as well as they could. We can learn from their wisdom, even when we disagree with their specific conclusions. We can be inspired by their dedication, their rigor, their honesty, their willingness to follow the argument wherever it leads. Let's continue our slow journey through this ancient wisdom, not hurrying, not grasping, just allowing these ideas to be present, to work on us at their own pace. There's still more to explore, more to consider, more perspectives to hear. The night is long, and we have time, all the time we need, to think about happiness, to think about how we want to live, to think about what the ancients can teach us that might help us live a little better, a little more wisely, a little more peacefully. As we move further into these reflections, it's worth considering what all these ancient schools had in common, what united them despite their differences. One common thread is the emphasis on self-knowledge. Know thyself was inscribed on the temple of Apollo at Delphi, and it became a fundamental principle of ancient philosophy. Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. The Stoics practiced daily self-examination. Epicurus taught his followers to analyze their desires to see which were natural and necessary, and which were empty. Plotinus taught a kind of introspection that led to awareness of the soul's true nature. All of them believed that most people are confused about what will make them happy, that we chase after things that won't satisfy us, that we're driven by opinions and social pressures, rather than by genuine understanding of what's good for us. And the first step toward genuine happiness is self-knowledge, understanding what we really need, what we really value, what really matters to us, as opposed to what we think should matter, or what others tell us should matter. This self-knowledge comes through reflection, through questioning, through paying attention to our actual experience rather than our theories about experience. Do the things you pursue actually make you happy, or do they leave you empty, craving more, never satisfied? Are you happy when you get what you want, or does the happiness fade quickly, leaving you seeking the next thing? What actually brings you peace? What actually brings you joy? Not what you think should bring you peace and joy, but what actually does. The ancient philosophers were empirical in this sense. They observed themselves and others. They tested their theories against lived experience. They were willing to revise their views if the evidence didn't support them. And they generally concluded that most people are looking for happiness in the wrong places, seeking it in external things that are unstable and unsatisfying, rather than in internal things like virtue, wisdom, understanding, self-control, acceptance, which are stable and satisfying. Another common thread is the emphasis on virtue, or excellence. Even the Epicureans, who made pleasure the goal, defined pleasure in such a way that virtue was necessary to achieve it. You can't have lasting pleasure, can't have tranquility, if you live unjustly, if you harm others, if you're driven by greed or ambition or fear. The virtues, wisdom, justice, courage, temperance, these aren't just moral requirements imposed from outside. They're conditions of happiness, internal states that make happiness possible. This is a profound claim, one that goes against much of contemporary culture, which often sees virtue as a constraint, a set of rules that limit our freedom and interfere with our happiness. The ancient philosophers saw it differently. They saw virtue as freedom, as the development of our highest capacities, as the expression of our true nature, as the only reliable foundation for happiness. A person who is wise, just, courageous, and temperate is free in a way that a person driven by appetites and emotions and social pressures is not. The virtuous person acts from understanding and choice, not from compulsion or ignorance, and this freedom is itself a kind of happiness. The ancient world also emphasized community, though this takes different forms in different schools. Aristotle believed humans are by nature political animals, that we can only flourish in the context context of a good community, that friendship is essential to happiness, that we need others to develop our virtues, to live well, to be fully human. The Epicureans formed close-knit communities, gardens where friends lived together, supporting each other, enjoying simple pleasures, discussing philosophy. The Stoics believed all humans are part of a universal community, the cosmopolis, citizens of the world, related to each other through shared reason, each having duties to the whole. None of the ancient philosophers promoted radical individualism, the idea that you can or should pursue happiness in isolation from others. Even the contemplative life, even mystical union, were understood to occur within a social context, a tradition, a community of seekers. Happiness might ultimately be an internal state, but it's developed and sustained in relationship with others, through teaching and learning, through friendship and cooperation, through living together in cities and communities. This is important to remember in our own time, when we're often isolated, when community ties have weakened, when many people live alone or feel alone even in crowds. The ancient philosophers would say that this isolation itself is an obstacle to happiness, that we need others, need relationships, need to be part of something larger than ourselves, need to contribute to the common good. Happiness isn't just about getting your individual life right. It's about being rightly related to others, to your community, to humanity as a whole. Another commonality is the acceptance of mortality, the recognition that we will die, and that this recognition should shape how we live. The Epicureans said we shouldn't fear death because we won't experience it. The Stoics said we should remember death, practice negative visualization, keep mortality before our eyes so that we appreciate life and don't waste it on trivial pursuits. Socrates drank the hemlock rather than compromise his principles, showing that a good death, a death faced with courage and integrity, is preferable to a bad life. Plotinus taught that the soul is immortal and returns to its source, so death is not an end but a transition. Whatever their specific views, all the ancient philosophers agreed that awareness of mortality is essential to living well. If we forget we're going to die, we live as if we have infinite time, and we waste it. We put off what matters. We pursue trivial things. We don't appreciate what we have. But when we remember that our time is limited, that death could come at any moment, that we don't know how much time we have, then we're motivated to live now, to not postpone, to do what's important, to be with people we love, to pursue wisdom, to live virtuously, to make our lives mean something. This doesn't mean being morbid or depressed about death. It means being realistic, being aware, being wakeful. The Latin phrase, memento mori, remember that you will die, was a reminder not to despair, but to live fully, to not waste the precious time you have, to make each day count. And many ancient philosophers reported that this awareness, rather than making them sad, made them more joyful, more grateful, more present, more alive. We sit with this awareness, this knowledge that we're temporary, that this life is brief, that we have a limited number of days, and we don't know how many. It's not a depressing thought, really, though it might seem so at first. It's clarifying. It helps us see what matters and what doesn't. It cuts through the trivial concerns that consume so much of our time and energy. It reminds us that we're here now, alive now, and that now is when we should live, not in the past, which is gone, or in the future, which may never come, but now, in this moment, which is all we ever really have. The ancient philosophers were also concerned with the relationship between individual happiness and justice, between living well yourself and contributing to the good of others. For Plato and Aristotle, this wasn't really a dilemma. They believed that justice is good for the just person, that virtue benefits the virtuous, that you can't be truly happy if you're unjust. Helping others, contributing to your community, living ethically, these aren't sacrifices of your happiness for others' benefit. They're components of your happiness, ways you flourish, ways you develop your capacities and fulfill your nature. The Stoics agreed. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminds himself that he was born to work with others, that human beings are made for cooperation, that his own good and the common good are inseparable. When he's frustrated by others' behavior, he reminds himself that they're part of the same whole, that he can't be happy while separated from them, that his duty is to help them if he can, to bear with them if he can't, to never give up on the fundamental unity of humankind. Even the Epicureans, who seem more focused on individual tranquility, emphasized friendship and mutual support. You can't have ataraxia if you're constantly worried about enemies, or guilty about harming others, or isolated without friends. Living well means living cooperatively, kindly, justly. It means creating conditions where everyone can pursue happiness, not just yourself. This is another ancient insight that resonates, that my happiness and yours aren't opposed, that we don't have to choose between self-interest and morality, that what's genuinely good for me is also good for others, and vice versa. The competitive, zero-sum view of happiness, the idea that your gain is my loss, or that I can only be happy at others' expense, this wasn't how the ancient philosophers saw it. They saw human beings as fundamentally social, interdependent, sharing a common nature and common needs, all capable of virtue and happiness, all better off when we cooperate than when we compete. The night continues, and we continue with it, thinking slowly, letting these ideas accumulate, layer upon layer, each adding nuance and depth to our understanding of what the ancients believed about happiness. There's no rush to synthesize all this, no need to come to a conclusion. We're simply dwelling in this space of ancient wisdom, letting it speak, letting it resonate, letting it work on us at levels deeper than conscious analysis. What's emerging from all this is a picture of happiness very different from what modern culture often presents. Modern culture often equates happiness with pleasure, with getting what you want, with success, with freedom understood as doing whatever you desire, with excitement, entertainment, stimulation. The ancient philosophers are suggesting something else: happiness as virtue, as wisdom, as self-control, as acceptance, as living in accordance with reason and nature, as inner peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. This ancient understanding is more demanding in some ways. It requires self-examination, discipline, practice, the development of character over years. You can't buy it, can't get it instantly, can't have it given to you. You have to work for it, have to change yourself, have to become someone capable of happiness. But it's also more stable, more reliable, more within your control. You don't need perfect circumstances. You don't need to be wealthy or famous or powerful. You don't need everything to go your way. You just need to develop virtue, to pursue wisdom, to live well. And that's always possible, always available, regardless of your external situation. The ancient view is also less about feeling and more about being. Modern happiness is often understood as a feeling, an emotion, a mood, something you feel or don't feel at any given moment. Ancient happiness is understood as a state of being, a condition of character, a way of living. You might not always feel happy in the modern sense, but you can be happy in the ancient sense if your life has the right shape, the right direction, the right character. This is why the ancient philosophers could say that someone is happy even when suffering, even when facing death, not because they feel good, but because they're being good, because they're maintaining their virtue, because they're living well even in difficult circumstances. The modern view would say that's impossible, that you can't be happy if you're suffering. The ancient view says suffering is inevitable, that it's part of life, and that happiness consists not in avoiding suffering, but in facing it with virtue, with courage, with wisdom, with dignity. This is perhaps harder to accept, but it's also more realistic. We can't avoid suffering. We will all face loss, pain, difficulty, death. If happiness depends on avoiding these things, then happiness is impossible, or at best temporary and fragile, always threatened by the next misfortune. But if happiness depends on how we face these things, on maintaining our integrity and virtue regardless of circumstances, then happiness is achievable, reliable, within our power. Let's think more about the role of philosophy itself in ancient happiness. For most of these thinkers, philosophy wasn't an academic discipline or a career. It was a way of life, a practice, something you did every day, something that shaped everything else. The Greek word philosophia means love of wisdom, and wisdom was understood as practical, as knowledge of how to live well, not just theoretical knowledge of abstract truths. To be a philosopher, in the ancient sense, was to be a student of life, someone constantly learning, constantly practicing, constantly trying to become better, wiser, more virtuous. It meant daily meditation, self-examination, study, discussion, contemplation. It meant living simply, avoiding excess, being honest, helping others, facing difficulties with courage. Philosophy was therapy for the soul, medicine for what ails us, a path to health and wholeness. The philosophical schools were like schools in our sense, but also like what we might call spiritual communities or therapy groups. Students lived with their teachers, learned by example as much as by precept, practiced philosophy together, supported each other. There was a curriculum, yes, with texts to read and arguments to learn, but there was also a way of life to be lived, habits to be formed, character to be developed. When someone came to Epicurus's garden or to the Stoic school, they weren't just learning abstract doctrines. They were learning how to be happy, how to live without fear and anxiety, how to face death, how to relate to others, how to find peace. Philosophy offered what religion offers to many people: a comprehensive worldview, a set of practices, a community, guidance for living, comfort in difficulty, hope, meaning. And it worked, apparently. We have accounts of people whose lives were transformed by philosophy, who went from anxiety to peace, from confusion to clarity, from vice to virtue, from despair to contentment. We have letters from Epicurus to his followers, written when he was dying from a painful illness, in which he says he's perfectly happy because he spent his life cultivating tranquility and he has memories of philosophical conversations with friends to sustain him. We have Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, private notes to himself, in which we see someone using Stoic philosophy to maintain sanity and virtue while dealing with almost unbearable pressures. Philosophy wasn't just theory for these people, it was practice. It was life. It was what made happiness possible. And perhaps that's something we've lost. This sense of philosophy as practical wisdom, as guidance for living, as essential equipment for a human life. We tend to think of philosophy as abstract, academic, disconnected from real life. The ancients thought the opposite, that philosophy is the most practical thing there is, because it teaches you how to live well, and what could be more practical than that? If we wanted to recover this ancient approach, what would it look like? It would mean taking time each day for reflection, for reading wisdom literature, for examining our lives and choices. It would mean having friends or a community with whom we discuss these things, with whom we practice philosophy together. It would mean viewing our challenges as opportunities to practice virtue, to apply philosophical principles, to grow. It would mean orienting our lives around wisdom and virtue rather than around wealth, pleasure, status, or power. This doesn't require becoming a monk or withdrawing from ordinary life. The ancient philosophers lived in cities, had families and careers, participated in public life, but they had an inner orientation, a set of practices and priorities that made them different from people who just went along with convention, who never examined their lives, who pursued whatever society told them to pursue without questioning whether it would actually make them happy. We can do this too. We can be philosophers in the ancient sense, lovers of wisdom, seekers of the good life, practitioners of virtue. We can read the ancient texts not just as historical documents, but as living wisdom, as guidance for our own lives. We can take from them what helps, practice what works, develop our own understanding through years of study and practice and living. This is perhaps the ultimate lesson from ancient philosophy about happiness, that it's possible, that it's worth pursuing, that there are paths to it, but that it requires effort, requires changing how we think and how we live, requires commitment to wisdom and virtue, requires practice over time. The ancient philosophers are like guides who've walked the path before us, who can show us the way, who can warn us of pitfalls, who can encourage us when it's difficult, who can remind us why it's worth it. We rest here, in this understanding of philosophy as a path to happiness, philosophy as practice, philosophy as a way of life. The night is deep and quiet, and we've journeyed far, through many schools of thought, many approaches to the fundamental question of how to live well, how to be happy, how to flourish as human beings. Each approach has offered something valuable, and together they create a rich tapestry of wisdom that we can draw on, that remains available to us across the millennia. Let's think now about what happiness meant in terms of the relationship to nature and the cosmos in ancient thought. This is another theme that runs through many of these schools. The idea that happiness involves understanding your place in the natural order, living in accordance with nature, recognizing that you're part of something much larger than yourself. For the Stoics, this was central. They believed the universe is a living, rational, divine whole, and that everything happens according to divine reason, divine providence. Everything that happens is necessary, part of the universal pattern, and the wise person accepts this, welcomes it even, because to resist what must be is irrational and disturbing. The famous Stoic maxim is, live according to nature, which means according to universal nature, the rational order of things, and according to human nature, the rational and social nature that we have as humans. When you understand that you're part of this cosmic whole, that you're a fragment of God, as Marcus Aurelius says, or a part of the universal reason, then you don't see yourself as separate, isolated, at odds with the world. You see yourself as integrated, connected, playing your role in the great drama of existence. And this brings peace, this sense of belonging, of being where you should be, of doing what you should do. Even when circumstances are difficult, even when you're suffering, you can accept it as part of the natural order, as necessary for the whole, even if not pleasant for you. This isn't fatalism, because you still act, still make choices, still exercise virtue, but it's acceptance of the framework within which you act, acceptance that you're not in control of the universe, that your life unfolds within larger patterns that you didn't choose and can't change. Aristotle also spoke of living according to nature, but he meant it differently, more biologically. He thought each thing has a nature, an essence, a characteristic way of functioning, and that flourishing means fulfilling that nature, actualizing your potential, being what you are in the fullest sense. For humans, this means exercising reason, developing virtue, living socially and politically. These aren't arbitrary requirements, but expressions of what it is to be human, what humans naturally are and do when they're healthy and functioning well. So for Aristotle, happiness means fulfilling your human nature, not fighting against it or trying to be something you're not, but becoming fully, excellently human. And this is natural, not in the sense of effortless, but in the sense of appropriate to what you are, aligned with your nature. Even Epicurus, who had a more mechanical view of nature, atoms and void, no divine providence, still thought happiness came from understanding nature and living accordingly. His famous motto was, "Live unknown," meaning don't seek fame or public office, don't get caught up in the competitive struggles of political life, but live quietly, simply, in accordance with your natural needs, which are few and easily satisfied. The idea running through all this is that happiness isn't about imposing your will on the world, about forcing reality to conform to your desires, about fighting against nature. It's about understanding nature, accepting it, working with it, finding your place within it. There's a certain humility in this, a recognition that you're not the center of the universe, that the world doesn't revolve around you, that you're part of something much vaster and older and more powerful than yourself. But this humility is also liberating. If you stop trying to control everything, stop demanding that the world be different than it is, stop resisting reality, then you're free from an enormous burden. You can relax into what is. You can work with reality rather than against it. You can find your place in the natural order and be content there, rather than constantly struggling to be somewhere else, something else, someone else. This connects to the theme of acceptance that we've touched on several times. Acceptance doesn't mean passivity or giving up. It means recognizing what is, what must be, what can't be changed, and not wasting energy fighting against it. The Stoics put it memorably. We should be like a dog tied to a cart. The cart is moving, pulled by forces beyond the dog's control. The dog can run along with it willingly, or it can resist and be dragged. Either way, the cart goes where it's going. The only question is whether the dog suffers or not, and that depends on whether it accepts the situation or fights against it. This might sound like resignation, but it's not, because the Stoics also emphasize that we should act, should make choices, should exercise virtue. We're not just passive victims of fate. We're active participants in the cosmic drama. We just need to recognize what's in our control, our own choices and character, and what's not, everything else, and focus our efforts appropriately. When we accept the things we can't control, we free up energy to deal with the things we can control. We stop wasting time and emotional energy being upset about the weather, or the economy, or other people's behavior, or the fact that we're going to die. We accept these things as facts of life, as part of the natural order, and we direct our energy toward living virtuously, which is always within our power. This acceptance brings a deep peace, a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. You can be at peace even in difficult circumstances, even when things aren't going your way, because you've accepted that circumstances aren't entirely up to you, and you focused your attention on what is up to you, your own character and choices. And when you do that, when you live virtuously regardless of circumstances, you're happy in the ancient sense, flourishing as a human being, fulfilling your nature, living according to reason and nature. The moon sets, the stars wheel slowly overhead, and we continue to sit with these thoughts, these ancient reflections on happiness and how to achieve it. There's no urgency, no pressure to finish or conclude or arrive at a final answer. We're simply here, thinking, considering, letting wisdom from long ago speak to us in the quiet of the night, letting it suggest ways of seeing, ways of living, ways of being that might help us find more peace, more contentment, more fulfillment in our own lives. Let's consider now the role of desire in ancient conceptions of happiness. This is something most of the schools addressed, because desire seems to be at the root of much human unhappiness. We want things we don't have. We're never satisfied with what we do have. We're constantly craving, seeking, trying to acquire or achieve or experience something that will finally make us happy. And yet, when we get what we wanted, the satisfaction is brief, and soon we're wanting something else. The Buddha, in India, was teaching at roughly the same time as some of these Greek philosophers, and his second noble truth was that craving is the cause of suffering. The Epicureans and Stoics, working independently in Greece, came to similar conclusions. The Epicureans distinguished between different types of desires, natural and necessary. Food when hungry, drink when thirsty, warmth when cold, natural but unnecessary, fancy food, expensive wine, luxurious warmth, and unnatural and unnecessary wealth, fame, power. They said we should satisfy the first category, which is easy and brings real pleasure. We can occasionally enjoy the second category in moderation, but we should eliminate the third category entirely, because these desires are unlimited, can never be fully satisfied, and pursuing them brings more pain than pleasure. Think about it. How much food do you need to satisfy hunger? Not much. There's a natural limit. Once you're no longer hungry, eating more doesn't increase pleasure. It becomes uncomfortable. But how much wealth do you need to feel wealthy? There's no limit, because it's comparative. However much you have, someone has more. And if wealth is what you're seeking, you'll never feel you have enough. Same with fame, or power, or any of these unlimited desires. They have no natural satisfaction point, so pursuing them is pursuing something you'll never achieve, which guarantees frustration and unhappiness. The Epicurean solution is to eliminate these empty desires, to be content with simple pleasures, to train yourself to not want what you don't need. This is hard, because society constantly tells us we need more, we should want more. We'd be happier with more. But the Epicureans insisted it's possible, through philosophy, through practice, through living simply, to reduce your desires to what's natural and necessary, and thereby achieve contentment, independence, freedom. The Stoics went further. They said we should desire nothing except to act virtuously, to make good choices. Everything else is an indifferent, neither good nor bad, and therefore nothing to be desired or feared. You can prefer to be healthy rather than sick, wealthy rather than poor, but you shouldn't desire these things in the sense of needing them for happiness, or being disturbed if you don't get them. Your happiness should depend only on your virtue, which you always have, not on external goods, which you might lose. This is a radical simplification of desire. Instead of being pulled in 1,000 directions by countless wants, you have one desire, to be virtuous, to make the right choices, to live according to reason. And this desire can always be satisfied, because it's always within your power. You don't need any external thing to be virtuous. You just need to choose rightly, and you can always do that, regardless of circumstances. Both approaches, Epicurean and Stoic, are trying to solve the problem of desire. The way desire makes us dependent on things outside our control, the way it creates craving and dissatisfaction and suffering. And both solutions involve a kind of simplification, a reduction of what we want, a focusing on what really matters and letting go of the rest. This is countercultural in our time, when consumerism is the dominant economic model, and we're constantly encouraged to want more, to buy more, to never be satisfied with what we have. The ancient philosophers are suggesting that this is a path to misery, not happiness, that we need to go in the opposite direction, toward simplicity, toward moderation, toward contentment with less. And there's psychological evidence that they're right. Studies show that above a certain level of sufficiency, more wealth doesn't increase happiness, that comparing yourself to others makes you unhappy, even if you're doing well objectively. That experiences bring more lasting satisfaction than possessions. That simplicity and mindfulness bring more peace than accumulation and consumption. The ancient wisdom about desire is confirmed by modern research, but more importantly, it's confirmed by our own experience if we're honest. The things we thought would make us happy often don't, or the happiness they bring is fleeting. The new car, the new phone, the new clothes, the promotion, the recognition, they're exciting for a moment, and then normal, and then we're wanting the next thing. We're on a hedonic treadmill, constantly running but never getting anywhere, never arriving at lasting satisfaction. The ancient philosophers offer a way off the treadmill. Reduce your desires, simplify your life, focus on what genuinely brings lasting contentment, virtue, wisdom, friendship, understanding, and let go of the endless pursuit of more. This doesn't mean not having goals or ambitions. It means having the right goals, goals that align with what genuinely matters, goals that, when achieved, bring real and lasting satisfaction rather than just momentary pleasure followed by emptiness. Desire is also related to attachment, to the way we cling to things and people and circumstances, and suffer when we lose them or when they change. The Stoics practiced negative visualization, imagining loss, to loosen this attachment, to remind themselves that nothing is permanent, that everything is on loan and will be taken back. This might seem morbid, but it's actually liberating. When you remember that everything is temporary, you appreciate it more while you have it, and you suffer less when you lose it. Imagine holding a beautiful flower. If you forget it will wilt and die, you might be devastated when it does. But if you remember all along that it's temporary, that it's already dying from the moment you picked it, then you appreciate its beauty right now, in this moment. Knowing this moment is all there is, all there ever was. And when it withers, you're sad, perhaps, but not shocked, not devastated, because you always knew it was temporary. You never pretended it was permanent. This applies to everything: possessions, health, loved ones, your own life. Everything is temporary. Everything changes. Everyone dies. These are facts, and pretending otherwise doesn't change them. It just makes the inevitable losses more painful. But if we accept impermanence, if we internalize it, if we live with full awareness that nothing lasts, then we're freer, lighter, less anxious, more able to enjoy what we have while we have it, more able to let go when the time comes. This wisdom about desire and attachment is perhaps some of the most practical, immediately applicable wisdom from ancient philosophy. We can start today, right now, examining our desires. What do we want? Why do we want it? Will it genuinely make us happy? Is it something we actually need, or is it an empty desire created by advertising or social comparison? Can we be happy without it? Can we let it go? These questions, asked honestly and repeatedly, can gradually free us from the tyranny of desire, can help us distinguish between what really matters and what doesn't, can lead us toward the simplicity and contentment that the ancient philosophers described. We don't have to become ascetics or renounce the world. We just have to be more thoughtful, more intentional, more aware of what we're pursuing and why, more honest about what actually brings us peace and satisfaction. The night deepens further still, and we deepen with it, going further into these reflections, layer by layer, slowly building an understanding of ancient happiness, not as a set of doctrines to be memorized, but as a lived wisdom, a way of being, a set of practices and perspectives that can shape our lives if we let them. Another theme worth exploring is the ancient understanding of the relationship between reason and emotion in happiness. This is something they thought about carefully, and different schools had different views, but there are common threads. Generally, the ancient philosophers believed that reason should govern emotion, that emotions are often based on false judgments, that uncontrolled emotion leads to suffering, and that happiness requires emotional regulation, emotional wisdom, what we might call emotional intelligence. The Stoics went furthest in this direction. They believed that emotions, what they called passions, to distinguish them from good affective states, are false judgments. Anger is the judgment that someone has wronged you and should be punished. Fear is the judgment that something bad is going to happen. Grief is the judgment that you've lost something good. These emotions feel automatic, but they're actually based on judgments, and the judgments are usually false because they assume that external things are good or bad, which the Stoics denied. If you believe only virtue is good and vice is bad, and everything else is indifferent, then you can't be angry, because no one can actually harm you unless they corrupt your virtue, and only you can do that. You can't be afraid, because nothing bad can happen to you as long as you maintain your virtue. And you can't grieve, because you haven't lost anything truly good, just something indifferent like health or money or even a loved one's life, which is sad, but not bad. This sounds harsh, especially about grief, and even ancient critics accused the Stoics of being inhuman, unfeeling. But the Stoics didn't say you shouldn't care about anything, that you should be indifferent to everything. They said you should have preferred indifference, that you should reasonably prefer health to sickness, life to death, but you shouldn't need these things for happiness. You should be able to be happy even without them, even when you lose them, because your happiness is based on your virtue, not on external goods. The Stoic sage, the ideal wise person, doesn't experience the disturbing emotions that afflict ordinary people, but the sage does experience good affective states, like joy, as opposed to the passion of pleasure, caution, as opposed to fear, and wishing, as opposed to craving. These are rational responses to value, appropriate feelings based on correct judgments. The sage is calm, peaceful, joyful even, but not disturbed, not passionate, not driven by emotions beyond rational control. The Aristotelian view is more moderate. Aristotle didn't think emotions are false judgments that should be eliminated. He thought emotions are natural responses that should be educated, moderated, directed toward appropriate objects. Anger isn't inherently wrong. It's wrong to be angry at the wrong times, for the wrong reasons, to the wrong degree. But it's right to be angry at injustice, at the right time, to the right degree, expressed in the right way. The virtuous person, for Aristotle, has educated emotions. They feel what they should feel, when they should feel it. They're not emotionless, but their emotions support their reason rather than conflicting with it. They feel fear when there's something genuinely dangerous, but not about trivialities. They feel pleasure in virtuous actions, pain in vicious ones. Their emotions are aligned with their reason and values, which makes virtuous action easier, more natural, more pleasant. This seems psychologically more accurate than the Stoic view. We can't simply eliminate emotions through philosophical argument. Emotions are deeply rooted in our biology, our evolution, our history, but we can educate them, can train ourselves to feel appropriately, can develop emotional wisdom over time through practice and habituation. We can become people whose emotions support our values, rather than undermining them. The Epicureans had yet another view. They valued pleasure, but they defined it as absence of pain, absence of disturbance. So they weren't advocating for strong emotions, even positive ones. They wanted tranquility, calm, peace. Strong emotions disturb this peace, so they should be avoided. The way to avoid them is to eliminate the beliefs that generate them, like belief in divine punishment or fear of death or craving for wealth and fame. All these views agree that reason should govern emotion, that unexamined, unregulated emotion leads to suffering, that happiness requires some degree of emotional mastery. But they disagree on how complete this mastery should be, whether emotions can be eliminated. Stoics, educated, Aristotelians, or minimized, Epicureans. For us, the practical takeaway is that we don't have to be ruled by our emotions, that we have some agency, some capacity to shape our emotional life through our beliefs, judgments, and practices. When we're angry or anxious or sad, we can examine why, can question the judgments underlying these feelings, can ask whether they're appropriate, whether they're based on truth or on false beliefs, whether they're helping us or harming us. We can't just decide not to feel something and have it instantly go away. Emotions don't work like that. But over time, through repeated examination and practice, we can change our habitual patterns of emotional response. We can become less reactive, more considered, more emotionally balanced. We can develop what the ancients called apatheia, Stoics, or metriopatheia, Aristotelians, freedom from disturbing passions or moderation in passion, both of which contribute to happiness, to peace of mind, to flourishing. This is another area where ancient wisdom aligns with modern psychology. Cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, is based on the idea that emotions are caused by beliefs and can be changed by changing beliefs. This is essentially the Stoic view, and it works. People learn to examine their automatic thoughts, question them, replace them with more realistic and helpful thoughts, and thereby reduce anxiety, depression, anger. The ancient philosophers were doing this therapy on themselves, daily, as part of their philosophical practice. They were examining their impressions, their judgments, their emotional reactions, questioning whether they were rational, correcting them when they weren't. And they report that this practice brought them increasing peace, increasing freedom from disturbing emotions, increasing happiness. We can do the same. We can bring philosophical awareness to our emotional life, can question our feelings rather than just being swept away by them, can gradually develop more emotional wisdom, more emotional balance, more freedom from the passions that disturb our peace. This is practical philosophy in action, ancient wisdom applied to daily life. The kind of philosophy that actually makes a difference in how we feel and how we live. The stars continue their slow wheel across the sky, and we continue our slow journey through ancient wisdom about happiness. There's no hurry. There's no destination we're racing toward. We're simply here, thinking, reflecting, allowing these ideas to work on us at their own pace, trusting that understanding develops gradually, that wisdom takes time, that we don't need to grasp everything at once, but can let it unfold slowly, organically, naturally. Let's think about the concept of inner peace, which we've touched on several times, but which deserves more attention, because it seems to be at the heart of what many ancient philosophers meant by happiness. Ataraxia, the Greek word, means freedom from disturbance, tranquility, calm. This is what the Epicureans pursued, what the skeptics claimed to achieve through suspension of judgment, what the Stoics aimed for through emotional mastery and acceptance of fate. Inner peace doesn't mean being passive or emotionless or disconnected from life. It means having a center of calm that remains undisturbed, regardless of what's happening externally. It means being able to act, to feel, to engage with the world, while maintaining an inner stillness, a deep equanimity, a foundational peace that external events can't shake. This is different from happiness in the modern sense of feeling good, feeling excited, feeling pleased with how things are going. You can have inner peace even when things aren't going well, even when you're facing difficulty, even when you're in pain. Because inner peace is not dependent on external circumstances. It's a quality of your relationship to circumstances, your way of being present to whatever is happening without being disturbed by it. How is this achieved? Different schools had different methods, but there are common elements. First, understanding, knowing what matters and what doesn't, what you can control and what you can't, what's truly good, virtue, and what's indifferent, everything else. This understanding itself brings a kind of peace because it clarifies your situation, helps you know where to direct your energy, helps you let go of useless worry about things you can't change. Second, Acceptance. Accepting reality as it is, not demanding that it be different, not resisting what must be, not fighting against nature or fate or the way things are. This doesn't mean not trying to improve things when you can. It means accepting the framework within which you act, accepting that you're not in control of outcomes, accepting loss and change and impermanence as natural parts of life. Third, virtue. Living in accordance with your values, maintaining your integrity, doing what you believe is right regardless of consequences. This brings peace because you can respect yourself, because you're not divided against yourself, because your actions align with your beliefs. When you compromise your principles, when you do what you know is wrong, you lose this inner peace, even if no one else knows what you've done. You know, and that knowledge disturbs you. Fourth, practice. Daily meditation, self-examination, philosophical reading, mindfulness, whatever practices help you maintain awareness, regulate emotions, stay centered. Remember what matters. Peace isn't something you achieve once and then have forever. It requires ongoing practice, daily renewal, constant vigilance. The mind drifts, gets caught up in worries and desires and aversions. You have to keep bringing it back to center. Keep reminding yourself of philosophical principles. Keep practicing tranquility. Inner peace is perhaps the most valuable thing ancient philosophy can offer us because it's something we desperately need and rarely have. Our lives are often characterized by anxiety, stress, disturbance, constant mental noise, endless demands and stimuli pulling us in every direction. We're rarely at peace, rarely truly calm, rarely undisturbed for any length of time. And yet, the ancient philosophers assure us that inner peace is possible, that it can be cultivated, that it doesn't depend on having perfect circumstances or no responsibilities or complete control over your life. It depends on understanding, acceptance, virtue, and practice. These are within our reach. We can develop them. Even in the midst of our busy, complicated, stressful lives, we can find moments of calm, cultivate them, extend them, make them more frequent until gradually they become our baseline, our default state, and disturbance becomes the exception rather than the rule. This is not easy. It takes time, effort, commitment, but it's possible. The ancient philosophers lived in a world that was in many ways more difficult than ours. They faced wars, plagues, political instability, lack of modern medicine, short life expectancies, slavery, injustice. And yet, many of them achieved remarkable inner peace, maintained it through extraordinary difficulties, and taught others how to do the same. If they could do it in their circumstances, we can do it in ours. We have the same human capacities they had: reason, will, the ability to choose our responses, the ability to develop virtue, the ability to practice philosophy. We have their writings to guide us, their examples to inspire us, their techniques to use. We have everything we need except perhaps the commitment, the willingness to actually do the work, to make philosophy a daily practice, to prioritize inner peace over external success, to value tranquility more than excitement, to seek wisdom rather than just information. This is the challenge ancient philosophy poses to us, not just to read about inner peace, but to pursue it, to practice it, to gradually transform ourselves into people capable of maintaining calm regardless of circumstances, people who have found that deep inner stillness that the ancient sages described, that they embodied, that they promised is available to anyone willing to walk the philosophical path. The night is very late now, or very early, depending on how you look at it. The darkest hour before dawn, and we're still here, still thinking, still exploring these ancient ideas about happiness, about what makes a life good, about how human beings can flourish in a difficult and uncertain world. There's something fitting about doing this in the deep night, in the quiet, when the world is still, and there are no distractions, when we can truly focus, truly think, truly listen to these ancient voices speaking across the centuries. Let's consider one more theme before we approach the end of our journey through ancient happiness, the theme of meaning and purpose. The ancient philosophers were very concerned with this, with the question of what life is for, what we're here to do, what makes a life meaningful as opposed to merely pleasant or successful. For Aristotle, human life has a telos, a purpose or goal, which is eudaimonia, flourishing, living well, and we achieve this by fulfilling our function, exercising our distinctive capacities, living as rational and social beings. Our life has built-in purpose, given by our nature. We don't have to create meaning, we just have to recognize what we are and live accordingly. For the Stoics, we're part of a rational cosmos, and our purpose is to play our assigned role in the cosmic drama, to fulfill our duties as rational and social beings, to contribute to the good of the whole. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminds himself that he was born to work with others, that he has a role to play, that his life has meaning as part of the larger order. For Plotinus and the Neoplatonists, life's purpose is to return to our source, to ascend back toward the One, to purify ourselves, to transcend the material and unite with the divine. This gives ultimate meaning to everything we do. Every act of virtue, every moment of contemplation, every step toward self-knowledge is part of the journey home. Even the Epicureans, who didn't believe in divine purpose or cosmic meaning, believed life has value and purpose in the pursuit and enjoyment of pleasure, understood as tranquility, friendship, philosophy. A life lived simply, peacefully, with friends, in a garden, discussing ideas, enjoying modest pleasures. This is a life well lived, a life with meaning, even if the meaning isn't written into the cosmos, but is created by humans for themselves. All these views share the conviction that human life can and should be meaningful, that we're not just here by accident or to no purpose, that there are better and worse ways to live, that some lives are well lived and others wasted, that it matters what we do and how we live. This is very different from nihilism or absurdism or the view that nothing matters, that all meaning is arbitrary, that we're just animals driven by instincts and there's nothing higher or deeper. The ancient philosophers were convinced that there is something higher and deeper, whether they called it virtue or reason or nature or the good or the gods or the One. Human life is connected to this higher reality, and happiness comes from aligning ourselves with it, from fulfilling our proper function, from living according to reason and nature, from pursuing what's genuinely good. This gives life structure, direction, purpose. You're not just drifting, driven by impulse or circumstance. You're oriented toward something, moving toward a goal, living in accordance with principles that matter. And this sense of purpose, this feeling that your life means something, that what you do matters, that you're part of something larger than yourself, this contributes greatly to happiness. Modern psychology confirms this. People who have a sense of purpose, who believe their lives are meaningful, who are connected to something larger than themselves, whether that's a cause or a community or a tradition or a spiritual reality, these people are happier, more resilient, more satisfied with their lives. Meaning matters, perhaps more than pleasure or success or any external good. The ancient philosophers understood this. They knew that humans need meaning, need purpose, need to feel that their lives are part of a larger story, a larger order, a larger good. And they offered various ways to find that meaning: in virtue, in reason, in nature, in community, in contemplation, in the pursuit of wisdom. All these are still available to us. We can still find meaning in the same ways the ancients did, by connecting to what's larger than ourselves, by committing to something worth committing to, by living in accordance with principles that matter, by contributing to the good of others, by seeking truth and beauty and wisdom. This is perhaps the deepest sense in which ancient philosophy can help us be happy, by helping us find meaning, by showing us that our lives can and should have purpose, by connecting us to traditions and ideas and values that have sustained people for millennia, by reminding us that we're part of something much older and larger than ourselves, part of the ongoing human conversation about how to live well, part of the long line of people who have sought wisdom and virtue and tried to pass them on to the next generation. When we study ancient philosophy, when we practice it, when we let it shape our lives, we're participating in this tradition, we're connecting ourselves to this lineage, we're becoming part of something that transcends our individual existence. And this itself is meaningful, this itself contributes to happiness, this itself makes our lives richer and deeper and more than just a brief span of years between birth and death. So the ancient philosophers offer us not just techniques for being happier, but a vision of human life as meaningful, as purposeful, as connected to what's highest and best, as capable of greatness, as worth living fully and seriously and well. This vision itself is inspiring, motivating, elevating. It lifts us out of the trivial and the mundane and reminds us of what we're capable of, what we were meant for, what we can become if we commit ourselves to the philosophical life. The horizon begins to lighten, just barely. The first hint that day is coming, though the night is still deep and dark. And we've been on this long journey through ancient happiness, through all these different schools and perspectives, each offering its own wisdom, its own practices, its own vision of what makes a life good. We've heard from the pre-Socratics about nature and change, from Socrates about the examined life, from Plato about harmony of soul, from Aristotle about virtuous activity, from Epicurus about simple pleasures and tranquility, from the Stoics about inner freedom and virtue, from the skeptics about suspension of judgment, from Plotinus about mystical union. Each has contributed something to our understanding. Each has illuminated some aspect of the complex reality of human happiness. And perhaps the greatest wisdom is not to choose one and reject the others, but to learn from all of them, to take what's valuable from each, to synthesize them into our own understanding, our own practice, our own path to happiness. We might take from Socrates the commitment to self-examination, to questioning ourselves, to never being satisfied with unexamined opinions. We might take from Plato the understanding that we have different parts or aspects that need to be in harmony, that reason should govern, that we should aim at what's higher and better. We might take from Aristotle the emphasis on virtue as habit, as practice, as something developed over time, and the recognition that we need community and certain external goods to fully flourish. We might take from Epicurus the wisdom of simplicity, of reducing our desires, of being content with little, of valuing friendship and philosophy, and simple pleasures. We might take from the Stoics the distinction between what's in our control and what's not, the focus on virtue as sufficient for happiness, the practices of negative visualization and daily self-examination, the understanding that we're part of a larger whole. We might take from the skeptics the lightness of holding beliefs provisionally, the openness to being wrong, the peace that comes from not needing to be certain. We might take from Plotinus the sense of something transcendent, something higher that we can aspire to, contemplate, perhaps unite with. All of this is available to us. All of this has been passed down through the centuries, preserved in texts, commented on by generations of scholars and practitioners, kept alive as living wisdom that can still guide us today. We're the beneficiaries of this rich tradition, and we have the opportunity to draw on it, to practice it, to let it shape our lives. The ancient philosophers have shown us many paths to happiness, many ways to live well, many practices and perspectives that can help us flourish. The question now is what we'll do with this wisdom. Will we just let it remain as interesting ideas, historical curiosities, academic subjects, or will we actually use it, practice it, let it transform us? The ancient philosophers would hope for the latter. They didn't write and teach just to be studied. They wrote and taught to help people live better, be happier, find peace and meaning and fulfillment. Their philosophy was practical, therapeutic, transformative. It was meant to be lived, not just read about. And so, as we come to the end of this long exploration, the question remains with us. How will we live? What will we practice? What wisdom will we take from the ancients and make our own? What kind of people will we become? What kind of lives will we live? These questions don't have easy answers, and they're not answered once and for all. They're questions we return to again and again, throughout our lives, each time with a little more experience, a little more understanding, a little more wisdom. The examined life is a continuous practice, not a destination we arrive at. The philosophical life is a journey, not a conclusion. But we can begin. We can start where we are. We can take one practice, one idea, one insight from what we've explored tonight and actually apply it. Maybe it's examining our judgments, noticing when we're disturbed and asking what judgment is causing the disturbance. Maybe it's simplifying our desires, letting go of something we thought we needed but actually don't. Maybe it's practicing gratitude for what we have, rather than always wanting more. Maybe it's meditating on mortality, to appreciate life more fully. Maybe it's reading some ancient text slowly, carefully, letting it work on us. Maybe it's discussing these ideas with friends, forming a kind of modern philosophical community. Whatever it is, we can begin. We can take one small step on the philosophical path, and then another, and another. And over time, over years, we'll find that we've changed, that we've developed wisdom and virtue and inner peace, that we've become happier in the deep ancient sense, that we're living well, flourishing, fulfilled. This is what the ancient philosophers offer us, not easy answers or quick fixes, but a path, a practice, a tradition, a way of life that has sustained people for thousands of years and can still sustain us today. The path is there, the wisdom is there. The question is whether we'll walk it, whether we'll practice it, whether we'll let it transform us. The night is ending. Dawn is approaching, and with the new day comes the opportunity to begin again, to practice philosophy, to pursue wisdom, to live a little better than we did yesterday, to take one more step toward the happiness that the ancient philosophers described and embodied and promised is available to anyone willing to make the effort.